So here we are at Ballydowane Cove. We're almost at the most western end of the Copper Coast location. And here we have some beautiful, almost vertical, dramatic cliffs. They're almost painted a pink and green colour in different layers. And these two rocks tell us two completely different stories. As I said, the first episode of volcanics, known as the Bunman volcano, rocks from this are exposed all along the running west from Bunman to Stradbally. And here, along the cliffs here, the green rock that we see is the rock from that first episode. It's called andesite. And this volcano was a very runny volcano. It ran almost like a river. It wasn't any way explosive. It was a much gentler, earlier volcano. It was when the volcano was very, very young. Sitting almost next to this, we have rock that is almost 100 million years older, and it is a beautiful red colour, and it's called Old Red Sandstone. This rock formed when Ireland had joined together, the Iapetus Ocean had closed, and the northern half of Ireland, which was on the northern margin of the sea, and the southern part of Ireland, which was on the southern part, had joined together and were now raised above the sea level and were part of an ancient continent. We were situated on the eastern margin, the southeastern margin of this continent, and it was a complete desert environment. The Old Red Sandstone was laid down at this time in desert conditions. Through the sandstone, we can see a rock like this with some very rounded quartz pebbles. This is called a conglomerate. And during the time of the desert, it would have experienced a lot of flash flooding. You had a situation that would have been similar to the Nile River flowing through the desert. The rounded pebbles were formed because there was large mountain ranges to the north of where we were situated. And as there was very little vegetation on land, there was quite a lot of runoff and an awful lot of erosion from these mountains to the north. Lots and lots of volumes of quartz pebbles were brought down in these huge flash floods, and during transport they would have been rounded, and eventually as the power of the flood subsided, the load would have been dropped, the larger pebbles being dropped first and consequently fining upwards. Now, these rocks are really, really dramatic, and they're almost side by side, even though there's about 100 million years between their ages. Ireland, through its geological time, has been through two mountain building events. And during these events, the first was the Caledonian, the second was the Variscan. Rocks would have been uplifted, broken, buckled, fractured, almost overturned in some places. And the evidence of this we can see in these dramatic cliffs along the coast here. Because if you can take a look, the beds, sedimentary beds, which would have been laid down horizontally, we would have had our fine sands, and then during a flash flood, rougher pebbles or conglomerates, the rounded pebbles fining upwards. And if you take a look along the cliffscape here, you can see these beds. Some of them are actually angled. They've been uplifted to 45 degrees, and a little further along the cliff, they're almost vertical. So you can see there's been huge uplift here during the two mountain building events that Ireland has gone through. This spot is also a very significant spot in our story because it adds a little chapter to our mining history as well. In the 1700s, this area in Ballydowane was actually mined for silver. And it was the project of an entrepreneur called the Bull Wise. And there's a sea stack towards the eastern end of the beach. And if you go and have a close look at it, you will see that there has been a ventilation shaft drilled down through that sea stack. And this provided ventilation for the mine shaft underneath, because the mines here, the shafts extended out underneath the seabed. And there are testimonials from the workers in that mine to say that when it was high tide, the rolling of the rocks across the seabed during high tide was absolutely terrifying. So I can't imagine what life must have been like back then and how these miners worked in conditions like this. But the sea stack is there. The ventilation shaft has now been completely filled up with sand, but it did serve as a purpose of ventilation. The entrance to this mine is long gone because it was way back in the 18th century, but we still have the sea stack as evidence that it was here. There's a beautiful sea stack behind me here, and as you leave the beach, take a look, because the bottom of the stack is our conglomerate that formed when Ireland was a desert, and the top layer of the sea stack is the glacial till from the Ice Age sediments. And it's amazing to see that there's almost 300 million years of a time gap between these two deposits, but also they represent completely opposing environments, a desert and an ice age. So don't forget to have a good look at that stack as you leave the beach.